I lived a great lifestyle in Hawaii for almost 20 years, but it's an expensive place to live. And if I wanted to continue living there, I was going to have to continue to work. So I moved to Mexico where I could find a similar lifestyle for a lot less money without having to work.
Hey Gen Max, that was Steve that you just heard from, and he is going to be on camera a lot today talking about his experience choosing to leave behind paradise of Hawaii and instead choose the paradise of Mexico. So I know when Kat and I first started thinking about, well, where did we want to live part-time? Hawaii was at the top of our list. We'd spent some time there, and there were a number of reasons it didn't work out, and we'll probably cover those, but Mexico is a heck of a lot easier and also a heck of a lot more affordable. So that's what we'll be talking about today, is kind of Steve's life in Mexico, but also some of those pros and cons of choosing between two wonderful places that you can live. So Steve, tell us about where you live now.
Sure. I'm living in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which is a resort city on the Pacific coast.
Great. So, and why not go back to Hawaii? So let's go back to your Hawaii. You mentioned you would live there for 20 years. So let's just talk a little bit about what life was like in Hawaii for you for 20 years.
Life was great in Hawaii for 20 years, and it was a lot like life anywhere else in the United States, except the weather was always warm. So I worked very hard as a real estate agent in Hawaii, and I had no real estate experience when I moved there, so I established myself and built my business from scratch. So what that means is I worked really, really hard, usually 7 days a week, sometimes 10, 12 hours a day, sometimes less, but I worked really hard to be able to afford to live there in a nice way.
And where were you living, and kind of just tell us, like, what did life look like? And, maybe some of the pros and the cons, were you eating out all the time, or was it more of a eat-in type of thing? Like just because I know it's a more expensive place. I think I was reading that it's one of, like, the most expensive state in the United States to live in.
Yes, Hawaii is the most expensive state in the United States to live in. I don't know if it's true or not, but I have heard that generally cost of living is about 20% higher than in the mainland United States, and incomes are about 20% lower than in the mainland. So whether that's completely accurate or not, I'm not sure, but people seem to believe that. So I am single. I was single when I lived in Hawaii. I lived in urban Honolulu. I bought a one-bedroom condo at the base of Diamond Head, one of the most prestigious and desirable neighborhoods on the island. I lived on the least expensive street in the most expensive neighborhood. So it was a very desirable neighborhood, and it was close to lots of restaurants and easy access to places like Waikiki and to the beaches and to the hiking trails and all of the things that one would want if they lived in an urban neighborhood.
So you're getting closer to retirement age. What kind of helped you make that decision to say, okay, well, I do want to retire. I don't want to just keep working and living here.
So what propelled me into retirement is really quite simple. One word: COVID. So when COVID hit, my world changed 180 degrees, just like everybody else that I know. Being in real estate, it's a high contact industry. You're with people all the time. I didn't want to continue working and jeopardize my health, and also just have to deal with all of the new things we had to deal with in terms of begging people to distance and wear their mask, and just having multiple unpleasant interactions because half the people believed in protecting and taking care of everyone, and the other half of the people felt like it was their God-given right to do whatever they wanted to do and not consider anybody else. So after a couple of those types of interactions, and and experiencing the unpleasantness and stress of all of that, it occurred to me, you know what? I'm close enough to retirement age. It's always been my attitude as an entrepreneur to never do anything that I didn't want to do for money.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Yeah.
way that I was going to earn my living was going to be doing only what I wanted to do. And I no longer wanted to be in an industry where I had to interact closely with strangers. So I took a look at my bank balance, and I knew that if I found the right location, that I could redesign a new life for myself that did not include working closely with people. And so I knew I couldn't do that in Hawaii because of the expense of living. As much as I loved living in Hawaii and I loved the weather, I also knew that it wouldn't be sustainable to continue living there without generating a six-figure income every year. So it was very simple. I didn't really have to think about it very hard or very long, but living someplace in Mexico or some other spot in Latin America suddenly became the way to go for me.
Yeah, that was part of it with us. The other thing, and maybe we can go with some, we can talk a little bit about some of the differences between the places, but for us, we have pets. And we were planning to be part-time residents and move back and forth between Hawaii and Oregon. And moving pets between Hawaii and Oregon, or moving pets between Hawaii and anywhere, is really cumbersome. The testing that you have to do and the expense of these are really expensive tests to make sure that your pets are healthy before they move to the island, and then having to fly them back and forth versus being able to drive them down to Mexico. That was a big one for us. Of course, along with all the expense of just not only a place to live in Hawaii, but then once you're there, everything is more expensive. Versus, the opposite being true in Mexico. To get moving pets down here was super easy. I think you need a rabies vaccine certificate, but they never even check it at the border. You can drive, and everything is less expensive, including real estate. So maybe you can compare and contrast a few of the things that were better in Mexico and maybe some of the things that are also better in Hawaii.
Well, sure. What's better in Mexico, obviously, is it's a much more affordable place to live. One has to ask oneself how they want to live and what kind of lifestyle they require. Mexico may not be the place to live if affordability is the only consideration.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to have a similar level of amenities and conveniences in the United States, then you're going to have to spend more money than you think you will need to spend when you go to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So Hawaii being, of course, much more expensive, the pros are, well, it's like any other major American city. So what I mean by that is you have access to culture, fine dining, arts, entertainment, sports. There's no professional sports franchises in Hawaii, but Hawaii makes up for that with very passionate college sports, college football, college volleyball, other sports. There's a thriving art community in Hawaii. So all those things that you would experience in any other major American city. You also have fairly good infrastructure. The electricity works all the time. the roads are reasonably well paved. although traffic is a nightmare, just like in Los Angeles or San Francisco or any other major American city. So you have all of that. You have good health care in Hawaii, some excellent hospitals. And the other benefit that you get in Hawaii that you may not get in all other American metro areas is the multicultural feel of the place. So Hawaii is definitely a melting pot. So if you enjoy multicultural interactions and learning about other cultures, you will thrive in a place like Hawaii. If you are a white person and only want to be around people that look like you, then Hawaii probably would not be the place for you to go. Living in Hawaii, while more expensive, it has everything that you find in any other major American city. It is definitely not a backwater, and it is, anything that you need and anything that you would expect to have living in the United States is going to be right there in Hawaii. So people are not living in grass shacks in Hawaii. I got a lot of that from my friends when I moved over there. That's not the case. So when you're in urban Honolulu, you could be in Los Angeles, you could be in Dallas, you could be in Miami, you could be in any of those places, and you'd be living a similar lifestyle.
So a couple other things that I'm thinking of in Hawaii, as you were talking there, I was thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, Medicare. If you're on Medicare, you can get all your needs taken care of at the local hospital, versus Medicare does not work in Mexico. You've got to get back to the United States.
Well, it does and it doesn't, but I haven't tested it out yet, so I don't. I've been told there are loopholes.
There are loopholes. Yeah, well, what I've been told is that most people do maintain it in case there's a major emergency or something, so they can get back to the United States. And Mexico is very close to the United States, so it's not that hard to get back if you do need medical care. But obviously, you can walk into any hospital in Hawaii and you get your services. The other thing you mentioned, the roads. Yeah, Mexican roads are built to different standards. And, if you're worried about driving off the side of a highway, and you're one of those people who's really comfortable with how engineered things are in the United States and how every curve on the freeway tells you how fast you can go around it, and then there's a big barrier to make sure you don't drive off. In Mexico, that's not the case. The curves can be pretty tight and there's not a guardrail or it's been knocked over. So you are much more responsible to yourself for keeping yourself safe in Mexico than in any place in the United States.
That's true. Even as a pedestrian in Mexico. So when you're walking down the street in Honolulu or in any other American city and you get to the street corner, what do you take for granted? There's the walk and the don't walk signs, right? Mm-hmm. So when the don't walk sign starts flashing, you know that it's probably not a good idea to start crossing the street, or if you are going to start crossing the street, you better run so you get to the other side of the street before the light changes. That doesn't exist here in Mexico. And not only that, the traffic lights, they're just not prominent, right? So it's not easy to see the red light from a distance, right? And if you're the pedestrian, how do I say this? If you're walking down a one-way street, right? And you're walking against the flow of traffic and you get to the street corner, you don't see the red light. You don't see it. And there's no walk, don't walk sign. So if you're walking against the traffic, you really have no idea if it's safe to cross the street or not, and you have no idea how much time you have to cross the street, even if you have the light. So those kind of things, and I never thought of stuff like that. You don't think of that when you're planning your move to another country. You don't sit down and think, gee, I wonder if they have walk, don't walk sign. You find out after you get there. You go, oh, it's a different way of walking here. To say nothing of the fact that they don't give the pedestrians the right of way, which I already
Mhm.
knew that. I've been down here enough. They don't give it in Hawaii. You put your foot off the curb and traffic stops, and they let you cross. And when they park, sometimes, a lot of times, they'll park their car right on the corner where you as a pedestrian would step off the sidewalk to cross the street, right? There's just no mentality that of inconveniencing the pedestrian. You're on your own when you're a
Yeah.
pedestrian here.
Yeah, and I think that is, I mean, really, this is city by city because I know there's a couple of lights here. The police here do like to stop cars for going through a crosswalk when there's a pedestrian in it, like right near the bus station. They love that as like they catch people there. But yeah, everything is very different. Handicap ramps, yeah, maybe there, maybe not, but the sidewalks are not guaranteed to be flat. Actually, in one of the places in Querétaro, I think it is the little dolls, Lulu dolls. Someone will correct me down below. They have some crosswalk signals where they have the little dolls like walking across the street, but not very common. Mexico City does have a lot more infrastructure for pedestrians. I think just because there's so many pedestrians there, and for drivers too. You mentioned the lights; it's hard to see them. I've seen some LED lights where an intersection will have this one red, yellow, green, and there'll be like whatever there are, like 200 LEDs inside that red light, and only like 7 of them are working. So it's just like a little bit of red. But once again, you have to be responsible for yourself down here, which in some cases is a good thing. But one last thing before I let you start talking about the benefits or kind of some of the things about Mexico, or two last things. One is using dollars. In Mexico, there's some places where you can spend dollars, but for the most part, it's a different country. You got to spend their money. You have to spend in pesos, and you have to get used to that. And also drinking the water. Of course, in Hawaii, water is drinkable. In Mexico, most places, it's not. And lastly, you mentioned the multiculturalism, and I like how you kind of mentioned that as a pro or a con. So depending on your mentality, you may want to be in a very multicultural place, and you may not. And not holding anyone to any standards, but something to think about. This gets to that point of multiculturalism. In Mexico, at least here in La Paz, no good Asian food. In Hawaii, that place is loaded with amazing Asian food. So if you love your Asian food,
That's true.
I've heard Mexico City is okay on Asian food, but so let's flip it to some of those things about Mexico that people might not have thought about. That it might be some pros over Hawaii.
Pros over Hawaii. It's a more relaxed lifestyle. Now, Hawaii is a more relaxed lifestyle than most of the United States,
Mm-hmm.
but Mexico is a more relaxed lifestyle than Hawaii is.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
well, at least in Puerto Vallarta, you have amazing weather, which for me was a big consideration because I like warm weather. Weather in Puerto Vallarta and Hawaii, very, very similar. So, and you've got the same type of outdoor and beach activities
Yep.
that are in Hawaii.
The same plants, often very tropical in Puerto Vallarta.
You also have hurricanes in both Puerto Vallarta and Hawaii. So you have the same risk factors for natural occurrences. Both are destinations, so people come here as they do to Hawaii to have an experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they don't know exactly what that experience is going to be, but they just know, hey, this is a resort destination. Everybody's happy. Everybody in Hawaii are drinking Mai Tais, and in Puerto Vallarta, they're drinking tequila. There's that,
Yep.
That party feel. There are a lot of similarities between the two places. In Puerto Vallarta, you can have a similar experience to Hawaii for a lot less money. You can also spend a lot of money here, but you don't have to.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I've wondered about, because when we were looking into moving to Hawaii, we were looking at moving to the Big Island, and I think it might be different in Honolulu than the Big Island, but there was definitely a maybe an acceptance of people from the mainland. So the people who've been there, who were kind of native to Hawaii, maybe not as accepting of outsiders. I have not seen that in Mexico at all. I mean, everyone's been incredibly welcoming. So, did you experience that at all in Hawaii?
Did I experience not feeling welcome?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of I think the Howley kind of experience of like, oh, you're not welcome here.
It's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of things. Yes, I was an outsider to a certain extent in Hawaii. I think on the Big Island, as you said, that feeling might be a little more intense because the Big Island is rural and is probably the closest to what you might get to when people talk about old Hawaii,
Yep.
right? I think on any island, there's this off island and on island mentality. And when you are born on an island and your family for generations has lived on that island, you are a part of that community in a way that nobody can be if they move there from thousands of miles away.
Yes.
And that's just the way it's going to be. I don't equate that with a feeling of being unwelcome.
Okay.
I just see that as, well, that's the way it is. I mean, think about it. It's like that way. It's like that in small town America too, right? If you grow up in some small town in a rural area, say in Texas or North Dakota or Maine or any of these other places that are far removed from an urban center where generation after generation after generation have lived, and if you move to that small town, you're also going to be seen as an outsider. I think that's just the way it is in smaller communities.
Yeah.
But it does get a little more complicated in Hawaii because of Hawaii's history and how Hawaii came to be a part of the United States. And
right.
I am sorry to say, I'm a little ashamed to say, I knew nothing about Hawaiian history. I don't ever remember in history class being taught about how Hawaii came to be a part of the United States, other than the fact that, well, it was an island and we went there and the people were happy to join us and now they're part of us. That's not the case. I didn't really get that Hawaii was an independent kingdom doing just fine without the United States. I didn't get that once Americans and the English started coming to the United States and to Hawaii rather, and in particular the missionaries, I didn't get that they had brought diseases with them that devastated the local population. I didn't get how American businesses took over the economy. I didn't get that how American businesses overthrew the monarchy because the monarchy was not being friendly to business needs. I didn't get any of that.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until after I moved to Hawaii, I began to learn. And yes, there is to this day, and it wasn't that long ago, right? It was only a little more than 100 years ago that all of this happened. And so, yes, to this day, there is a slice of the Hawaiian population that is still angry at the way the United States stole the kingdom.
Yep.
And forced Hawaii into union with the United States. So there is always going to be a little bit of that. And so, therefore, it's a good idea for people who decide to move to Hawaii to be a little bit sensitive to the history and to learn the history and maybe avoid criticizing attitudes and how things are done in Hawaii, and just recognizing, for a lot of Hawaiians, this was very painful.
Yeah, and it seems like we're having a revitalization of the idea that children in the United States should not have to learn anything that makes them feel uncomfortable about things their ancestors did, which is really, really sad, because that's part of the American exceptionalism idea, is like, we've never done anything wrong. And then, like coming to Mexico, going to Mexico City and hearing about the Mexican-American War. And there's a lot of things that we learn that are written from the viewpoint of the winner. But anyway, we won't go into that, but that's definitely a thing. I want to shift gears a little. Yes, exactly. So I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about your life in Mexico now. Just some things like, about what does it cost to rent? Because I think you're renting now. A little bit of cost of living. Do you speak Spanish? Kind of some of the things that people really just want to know. Was there something that, shocked you when you arrived? You're like, oh, I didn't think about that one, except for the pedestrian lights.
Well, sure. Well, I do speak Spanish. There's definitely room for improvement, but my Spanish is not bad. And in it's almost 11 months that I've been here, my Spanish has improved quite a bit. However, if you want to move to Puerto Vallarta and you don't speak Spanish, you can move here, and there are enough. English is spoken widely enough because it's such a tourist destination. Well, I know people who have lived here longer than I who have yet to learn any Spanish, and I feel that's a mistake. I have a friend who got really angry. He went into one of the pharmacies, not one of the pharmacies that are in the tourist area, but he went into a neighborhood, and they didn't speak English, and they couldn't help him. And he got so angry that they didn't speak English, and he was ranting with me. And I said to him, gee, you live in Mexico now, right? And you know the language is Spanish here. Well, that shouldn't matter. They should be... Anyway, so there are people here that, after being here for a while, they haven't made an effort to learn Spanish. And I don't know if this is true or not, but it makes me think they might be the same type of people that get a little upset in the United States when an immigrant comes to the United States and they don't speak English very well.
Oh, yeah, totally. Those are the same exact people.
No, I was just going to say, there are times that I feel more comfortable speaking in English than in Spanish. For example, when I rented my apartment, I wanted to make sure I understood the terms of the lease, right? And I didn't feel like my Spanish was good enough to go through that lease in Spanish only. So I would also say medical care. So hopefully one day my Spanish would be good enough that if I had to go into the hospital for something, I would feel comfortable being treated by a Spanish-speaking doctor. But for now, I would prefer to speak in English if I needed serious medical attention. Finances, banking, going to the bank. I kind of speak a mixture of Spanish and English when I go to the bank. If it's a complicated transaction, I'm very appreciative of the fact that they'll speak English to me to make sure that I understand it. But as any time that I can speak Spanish, I do. And I don't worry about making mistakes. And it isn't about, I think maybe people are just afraid if they can't do something perfectly, they're not going to do it. That's not been a problem for me. Just make the mistake. I feel like people are very appreciative when you make an effort to communicate to them in the way that they like to be communicated to. I think that's just human nature.
Yeah, and actually, last night the videos will not come out at the same time, so this will come out later. So this video that I'm about to mention will be out by now. Last night, I got to do one of my bucket list things, which was to go to a quinceañera. And Kat actually didn't go. My Spanish is better than my wife's Spanish. And I think she was, well, first off, it started, the official invite said 8 p.m. So I got there around 9, and I'd say about half the people were there. So it's a late night thing. But this was a family, the entire extended family, no one spoke any English. And so I was there struggling with my Spanish, but I got to experience something because I have enough Spanish to feel competent to be in that situation. To be the only person who doesn't speak Spanish well. I actually was seated at a table with the grandmother of the quinceañera, and I was able to ask her things and able to ask my friend things. He doesn't speak any English either, to better understand what was going on culturally and to be able to kind of meet people and have just very, very basic conversations. It's one of those things where if I had a really good understanding and was really fluent in Spanish, I could have had a much more rich experience because I would have understood better. Like when they're on the microphone, what are they saying? And like, who is the person? And this was a good one here. There was a young man with the quinceañera, the woman who was turning 15. And I was like, who is that? I asked my friend, who is that? And he said, well, that's the padrino. And he had said that the woman's father is no longer in the picture, and he wasn't there. And so I was like, okay, padrino. And I looked it up because I was like, that means godfather. And that kid is the same age. So I was completely confused until this morning I looked it up. And in a quinceañera, a padrino means something slightly different than godfather. So it means your sponsor. So it's very similar, but it's one of those things where understanding basic Spanish, it almost got me into more of a confused situation because I ended up asking multiple people the same question and got different answers. But only this morning when I looked it up and got the details was I able to figure it out. Anyway, that's kind of an aside, but definitely I think the more Spanish you can learn, the more you can get into the culture and enjoy the culture. I've got a video coming up about that too. So, okay, let's get back to life in Puerto Vallarta. So what about expenses? Do you keep track of what you're spending?
I do. I keep track down to the centavo.
Very good.
Puerto Vallarta has turned out to be significantly more expensive than I planned on. And that's a fact. And I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do about that long term. Mm-hmm. But I'm spending significantly more money than I planned on spending. And I feel like there are several reasons for that. One is it's just gotten more expensive here. And Mexico has suffered from inflation just like the United States. In fact, the inflation rate is even a bit higher in Mexico than in the United States. Also, the peso is stronger than the dollar. The dollar is stronger than most currencies around the world, but not in Mexico. So the peso continues to gain value over the dollar, which means when I convert my dollars into pesos, I'm getting less than before.
Yeah, and let me just go into that real quick, just to give people an understanding, because I didn't really think about this. You're renting, and I was talking to some renters, and they were saying, yeah, well, when I signed my lease, a year or two ago, it was so many pesos, and that many pesos worked out to $500. But now that same exact number of pesos is $575. So that I think helps people understand what that difference in exchange rate means, especially when you have something that's a set cost in pesos. That means it's getting more expensive every time you pay it with your dollars that you've earned or are sitting in your bank account.
That's correct.
So let's go more into your expenses.
So my biggest expense is my monthly rent, and I am paying 25,000 pesos a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Puerto Vallarta. And it's fully furnished, and it includes my Wi-Fi, and it includes my water. It includes gas to heat the hot water, but it doesn't include gas for the stove.
Interesting.
So that's a separate tank. So I have to pay to replenish the gas for the stove, but the building takes care of the hot water.
Mm-hmm.
I pay electricity on my own, which, well, I haven't turned my air conditioner on for the summer yet. In the wintertime, my electricity is like around less than $30 for 2 months.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cheap. When the summertime comes, I expect when I start using the air conditioner, it'll probably go to the neighborhood of $50 to $60 for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
It could go more. I have friends that run their AC 24/7, which I don't. I usually just turn it on in the afternoon at the hottest part of the day. And then, but anyway, so that's my biggest expense. And then food, I'm spending more money on food than I had planned to spend. You know, it's just me, I'm single. I'm probably spending $250 to $300 a month on food.
And that's probably like a lot of eating out.
Not too much eating out.
Oh,
Not too much eating out. I prepare most of my own food. Now, I could spend less, but I do my shopping at a supermarket that is sort of like the Whole Foods of Mexico.
Yeah.
So in that store, the quality of the produce and the meat is super high, and there are lots of American imported products. And so you will actually spend more money on those products in Mexico than you would in the United States. I follow a keto diet, so I'm buying stuff like coconut flour and almond flour and coconut milk and, you know, cream cheese and butter and whipped cream. It's more expensive to be on a keto diet anyway. And so I buy a lot of products that are a little hard to find, and you pay the price for that. If I wanted to shop at the local markets, like a lot of people do, I could probably cut my food bill in half. I probably could. But I don't. I go to the American. So that's, you know, if I choose to stay here in Puerto Vallarta, so one of these days I'm going to have to adjust my budget. Again, I look at things from financially from a Hawaii perspective. So I'm still spending less money on my food and my housing than I did in Hawaii, but I'm probably spending about the same amount of money if I lived in, let's say, Kansas City or San Antonio or Albuquerque, you know, cities like that. So the prices here are comparable to our mid-sized, in the middle American cities, not coastal United States, but Midwest United States.
Yeah, and that's a good point. People ask me about that or comment when they see something like, oh, a condo for, you know, $1,000 or $1,200 or $1,300 a month. You know, I don't have to move to Mexico. I can get that here in Milwaukee. And I think people need to realize that Puerto Vallarta, La Paz, Cabo, this is the equivalent of California in the United States. This is not the equivalent
Correct.
of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Kansas City. This is gorgeous weather, beautiful views, scuba diving,
Correct.
snorkeling, all the things that make California really expensive. That's what the West Coast of Mexico is. So you have to compare to a similar place in the United States. Now, some people may compare to Florida and maybe Cancun and whatnot. Compare to Florida. I'm not as big a fan of Florida. I'm a West Coaster, but if you look at like a similar place to Kansas City, would probably be something more in the center of Mexico that doesn't have the the coastal expenses. It would be much less expensive than Kansas City too. So it's kind of like there's equivalent places in Mexico that are all less expensive, but you have to compare living on the beach or being in a condo that has a view of a beach. That's expensive. So like that's some people. I've even had people say like, "Oh, I live in Los Angeles, like way over, to the east side of Los Angeles or something." I'm like, "Well, you just got the smog and the traffic. You don't have all the beach stuff that makes living in Malibu expensive."
Yeah. And the other thing is, you're absolutely right. Puerto Vallarta is probably the most expensive place to live in Mexico, without a doubt. I could spend less money on housing here in Puerto Vallarta, but there is nice housing comparable to what we would expect in the United States, and then there is Mexican nice. And they're not at the same level. Let's take windows, for example. So Mexico is noisy. There's no way, I don't think there's a quiet place in all of Mexico. So if you're an American considering moving to Mexico, and if you need to have a lot of quiet, you might want to think about that a little bit. So when I took this apartment, I asked them, well, how's the noise going to be? And they told me, oh, these are brand new windows. You're not going to have any problem with the windows closed. You know what? That's not true. So in the United States, we sort of take double pane windows for granted, right? Well, you don't see that here in Mexico. So you close the windows over, and if it's noisy outside, it makes very little difference with the windows open or closed. The other thing, I'm looking at my windows. Now, they look very nice, but the way they're installed, they're not, the construction quality is not comparable to what we would expect in the United States. So I can see the daylight between the window frames, right? So there's no insulation. The size of the window opening is not necessarily built so that the window fits, right? So, you have these kind of things. So they'll say, oh, granite countertops. And you look at the granite and like, it is usually crooked. It's not cut right. And even, what's so funny, like where I am, the height of the counters, they're not the standard heights that we're used to in the United States. Where I live, they're actually higher than normal. And I think, wow, Mexican people are typically shorter than American people. And I think, wow, if you're a Mexican, you're like reaching up for your counters, right?
Yeah.
The cabinetry is usually not very of high quality. And like my cabinets, I open up my cabinets, they're not finished when you open them up inside. So I open up the cabinets, and what do I see? I see the floor, right? I don't see, the cabinets are not finished. The fixtures, the finishes, like, the faucets, they're like they're really cheap, and I feel like if I turn these faucets a little too hard, they're going to snap, right?
Yep.
So all of these things in construction in Mexico is sort of at a lower quality than what we are used to. And so so I'm paying 25,000 pesos. I guarantee you 2 years ago, this place was probably 15,000 pesos, maybe even less. So
Yeah.
that's the amount that prices have gone up in a short amount of time. I could probably find some place for, say, 10 to 12,000 pesos a month. I
Mhm.
could, but you know what? There would be no kitchen cabinets.
Uh-huh.
There would be no cabinets under the bathroom sink.
Yep.
There would be no closet in the bedroom. There might be a split AC, but most likely there would be fans and nothing more.
Mhm.
And it would just be like the lighting would be like, there might be like a single light
Dark.
bulb
Yeah.
that
Yep.
would be the only lighting, you know, stuff like that. So, I know that some people have this romanticized idea, oh, I'm going to go down to Mexico and I'm going to find a place for $500 a month. And you can. You can find a
Yep.
place for $500 a month if you want to, but you have to think about how you're going to live. I
Right.
am somebody who likes to be at home. And I do my work from home. I write. I do online webinars. I do online coaching. And I cook my own meals. And I like to turn the lights down low and light the candles at nighttime. I like the feeling of being cozy. So my environment is important to me. And I just know that I would feel depressed and unhappy if I lived in a bare bones place without cabinets and a bare light bulb in the wall and uncomfortable
Mhm.
furniture. That's not how I would want to live. And yes, I need to kind of tighten up my budget a little bit, but I'm not willing to live like that. And then here in Puerto Vallarta, there are people, and again, I don't live this kind of lifestyle, but there are people that come here for the party.
Yep.
And it's fine. It's fine. So what they do is they sleep until like 10 o'clock in the morning, and then they go out for breakfast somewhere, and then they go to the beach, and then they go home and take a nap, and then they get up and take another shower, and they go out to dinner, and then they go out to the clubs, and then they stumble home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they pass out, and they're only using their place to live for a crash pad, right?
Yep.
So you can have that here. And if that's the way you're wanting to live, I suppose it wouldn't make sense to spend more than $500 a month. But if you're a
Mhm.
person who wants to have a home life, you're gonna spend more than $500 a month, I guarantee.
Yeah. Actually, when I was in Puerto Vallarta, went to a house. It was a $4 million house, 4 point something, and I'll have a link to it in one of the corners here. But it's part of a real estate tour of Puerto Vallarta, actually, and it was just amazing. And so you can get amazing. And I think they said that their estimate was that was like a $25 million house in California, but a $4 million house in Puerto Vallarta. So it all the options are there. So you can have very, very simple living for not much money, and you can have very, extravagant living for a lot of money. Everything is just, a lot lower price than in the United States. But all those options are there. You just have to choose which one you want. But so one of the things I do want to mention is how we met. We met through the Mexico relocation guide. Mariana
We did.
introduced us because you were doing a testimonial video for that. Just tell us really quickly your experience with the Mexico relocation guide.
It was great. So I started watching YouTube videos when I was figuring out how I was going to leave Hawaii and where I was going to go. And somehow I came across Mariana that way. And so I did sign up for her Mexico relocation guide. And I used it a lot in the beginning. What was great, she had almost every week she had like a live session where she would bring some service provider in, and people would just ask questions like how to buy a car, how to rent a house, how to get medical care, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest help for me was there were step-by-step directions on how to go about getting your residency. And so that was worth, just that alone was worth the money that I paid for the guide.
Yeah, thank you. So I highly recommend the guide. There is so much great information in there. There is a link down below. I am partnered with Mariana on, kind of getting the guide into more people's hands. So thank you for the support for not only Mariana, but for this channel too. But really, she is really
Of
awesome
course.
at keeping information up to date and making sure that it's correct versus us in the YouTube world. We're out here. It's a little bit of an entertainment. It's a little bit of lifestyle. Mariana is definitely very good at connecting with the people who know the exact right information. That's really the benefit that she brings. So I do want to wrap up this video, though. This has been really great, and hopefully people who are juggling between Hawaii and Mexico are a little bit closer to making a decision. I think you pointed out a lot of great things to think about, and I think that's key. A lot of people who are watching this are in the think about it stage, and there are lots of different places in Mexico, so there's lots of different experiences that you can have moving to Mexico, but I highly recommend it. It sounds like you are enjoying this transition. So any last words that you have for people before we depart?
I think the people who do well in life are people that approach life with a sense of joy and happiness and are able to adapt themselves to their environment. And I've made enough moves to know that every time I move somewhere, I'm still the same person, right? So moving somewhere, whether it's a block away or to the other side of the world, is not going to change who you are. And if you have any kind of challenges or problems in life, you're going to bring them with you, right? So
Yep.
you're still going to be that person. So if you're thinking that moving to Mexico is going to make you a different person, it's not. You're still going to be the same person when you get here. And just as best you can, let go of your expectations. Let the experience take you to wherever the experience is going to take you. Don't say, this is the way I want it to be, because you'll be disappointed. Let the experience take you, go with the experience, adapt, and don't expect the environment to adapt to you, but adapt yourself to the environment. And you'll be happier if you can do it that way.
That is so true. That is what Mexico's about. Is a lot of happy people here, and the people who do best here are the people who move here when they're already happy. So I've got a couple more videos for you Gen Mexers to watch here. One of them is that video about real estate in Puerto Vallarta, because that's what we've been talking about today. And another one is interviews, where it's a playlist of interviews with other expats who've done it before, who are experiencing this lifestyle. So check those guys out too, and hasta luego.